Welcome back to Genealogy TV, and this is another Footnotes episode. I call them footnotes because it's footnotes where the real sources are. Today's real source is Margaret Fortier. She is certified from the Board of Certification for Genealogists and is a member of the APG, which is the Association for Professional Genealogists. She's an expert in several areas, such as French, Canadian, and Portuguese ancestry, as well as immigration and naturalization. But today, we're going to talk about one of her favorite subjects, for which she is also an expert in, and that is how to get started with your Italian research. We're going to jump into that interview in just a few moments, but before we do, I'd like to remind you to subscribe to Genealogy TV on the YouTube channel and ring the bell so that you get notified of every new episode I upload. And now, on to our interview with Margaret Fortier. I'm so glad you're here because I know nothing about Italian genealogy. I don't have any Italian that I know of in my background. So, tell us where, if we're just discovering that we have Italy in our background, where do we start?
Well, you start here in the United States. That's your basic workflow for any immigrant, because you want to find out as much as possible about them here before you jump the pond. And the reason for that is because Italy has none, zilch, nada, no national databases. So if you do not know the town, you can't really look over there. So you want to mine the records in the United States to get as close to the town as possible before you look in any Italian records.
So they don't have any national archives online? Oh boy.
Well, they have archives, but they are by province, and a province includes many, many, many towns. And there isn't like a provincial index. You have to know the town.
Okay. That sounds very familiar with a lot of jumping the pond kind of research. We've always, I know for Ireland, I know even for myself, I have Danish ancestry. You kind of have to figure out the towns here. And we can do that through a lot of different records here in the United States. Once they immigrated here, somewhere in those records, it's going to say where they're from beyond just the country. So, well, that's good to know. All right. So if we know this, say we know the town or the province. Province is like a county, right? Or a district, maybe?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. And so once we know that, then what do we do?
Well, if you know the town, then there are several websites you can go to look for the Italian vital records. FamilySearch has a number of them, and that's good because they're free. Ancestry has some of them. And there's a wonderful site of the Italian Provincial Archives called Antenati, which currently has about a little more than half of the 95 archives online. So you can go to that site, and it actually has an English version, so you don't have to figure out the Italian.
I will try and put that link in the show notes too for folks who are watching.
And the thing there that's a little bit difficult is that it will tell you, well, here are births for these years, and then you go into a folder and you have the year, and you kind of have to go page by page. Sometimes there's an index, sometimes not. But if you know the year within a year or two, you can find it. The more difficult thing is figuring out the handwriting.
Yes, I am familiar with that from my Danish ancestry. And here's a tip. So on Facebook, I managed to find friends in Denmark when I was doing Danish research, so I imagine you could do the same thing, that would translate for me. So I'd say, hey, I don't understand this little loop in the handwriting. Can you tell me what that is? And they would write back and tell me. So I've met cousins that way, actually using DNA research too, that are descendants we have common ancestors, so they're in Denmark. So if you're fortunate enough to have or discovered cousins in Italy, I would imagine you could do the same thing.
Yeah, there's actually a Facebook group called Genealogy Translation, and people can go in and just post, a snippet or a record or something like that, and there's guaranteed to be someone who can translate it for you.
Well, that's a new tip for me too, because I hadn't heard that. One of the things that I've discovered beyond just the normal Google Translate, which is on Chrome, is the Google app. Have you seen that? The Translate app. So if you're traveling to Italy, right, and you have the Google Translate app on your phone, you can hold it up to a sign, a road sign, or and it translates like just immediately.
My husband showed me that. Yeah, that's pretty neat.
Yeah. Well, all right. So what's next for us if we are now? Tell me again the name of that website.
Antenati, Antenati.
So I'm imagining that not everything is online.
No.
Right?
No.
So if we are fortunate enough to travel to Italy, where would we go? Obviously.
Well, you would go to the town hall for the vital records.
Mm-hmm.
And they would probably have them. You can also go to the Catholic Church in the community for the baptism and marriage records. You can go to the provincial archives for the military records, because every male in Italy born about 1860 or so,
right,
was registered at birth for the military draft for when he was 18. So they didn't have any of this show up when you're 18. They had you from birth. And if you weren't there, like you had emigrated, because many, many young men emigrated at that time, they would have a notation, emigrated, went to the United States. You would have the provincial archives for that kind of records. And if you wanted to go further, there are some areas that have censuses and other kinds of things, but that's a little more advanced. If you get the birth, marriage, and death records, that gets you started, because like all of the most of the European records, it will give you the parents, the mother's maiden name, and then you can go back. I think of them like Russian nesting dolls. You find one record, you undo it, and then there's more, and then you undo that, and you can keep going back.
Well, that's what you want.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Is there any nuances with the family clusters, the family groups? I imagine, back in the day, like many of the countries, lots of family groups live together in small quarters or, farming villages where there's, aunts and uncles and cousins all living in the same place.
Actually, many of the Italians from a certain town all moved to a certain area in the United States. In fact, there are some U.S. towns that can trace directly to the Italian town, because so many of the people went there.
Mm-hmm.
Because don't forget, it was a huge, huge emigration. It was.
And what time period would you say that the biggest part of that immigration was happening?
19 to 1924, because the Immigration Act in 1924 greatly reduced the number who could come over.
Okay. So I know from some of my immigration classes that there was a push or a pull. Either people were leaving the country for a reason, or they were returning, or, they were seeking something better. Mm-hmm. What do you think the case is with Italy and the migration? Or do you know? Or is it a both? I don't know the history very well, so admittedly, I'm naive.
There are so many reasons. I mean, there was the poverty, semi-starvation. There was no public education, no required mandatory public education in Italy until 1911. Mm-hmm. Okay. So if kids got to the age of 8, they went to work in the fields.
Oh, wow.
There were lots of natural disasters, earthquakes. There was a tsunami in Sicily that followed an earthquake that wiped out like 250,000 people in the early 1900s.
Wow.
There were cholera epidemics, typhoid, because in southern Italy you had long, hot, dry summers followed by wet winters, just the perfect conditions for mosquitoes to, transmit disease. And then there was just the structure, which was really practically a feudal structure, where you couldn't get ahead. The landowner owned everything. And if you were a peasant, you had your little home and you walked to your fields. It could be like an hour away. And then you walked home for lunch, and then you walked back. And, it was just, there was no...
You carried your lunch with you to the field, right?
And then the military draft, when you were 18, from 18 to 21, you could be conscripted for up to 3 years. And in the early 1900s, Italy was very active in Ethiopia and other areas. So you could be sent far away for many years, So I think a lot of people just said, this is not going to get any better. And, so let's take a chance and go. And they did.
Okay, so, all right, so let's pretend for a moment that we know somebody is immigrating to the United States. Where would you suggest they go to find those travel records and or the immigration naturalization records?
Well, for the passenger lists, you can look on Ancestry and I believe FamilySearch. What I would recommend is actually using Steve Morse's site. He has a
link for that too.
He has a one-step website that's kind of like a front end to the other ones. It allows you to search more broadly. So you can, for example, search by the place they came from. Not something that you can normally search for in Ancestry or whatever. And this is where you have to be really flexible with your spelling because some of the listings, they didn't get it right, or they, part of the last names blotted out or whatever.
Right.
But you want to look for the passenger manifest, and don't assume that they came in through New York or they came in through Boston unless you know for certain. Just do a very broad search.
Okay. All right. Good to know. Good to know.
And then when you get the record, if you're lucky enough, they came late enough that the manifest will tell you who they left in Italy and who they're going to in the United States. And you always want to take those names and find out about them, because the person that they're coming to in the United States, they had to have come over at some point, and you want to find their record. And sometimes it will say it's a friend, but if you go and research it, you actually find out it's a cousin or something.
Part of that chain migration.
Yes.
I'm constantly talking about, almost in every video, it seems lately, about, the concept of cluster genealogy, or Elizabeth Shown Mill's fan research.
Yes.
So that's a good tip. That's another set of rocks that we need to be turning over as far as doing our cluster genealogy. Do you want to jump into these slides and take a look at what you sent over? You see that?
Yes, I do. This is my great-great-grandfather, who was born in 1852. And I'm just thrilled that I have a picture.
Wow, this is awesome.
I know. He was, I think he was about 70. He was coming from Buenos Aires, Argentina, to New York. That's this immigration card. And the reason I say on the slide that my ancestor was not Italian is because when he was born, there was no Italy. It was just a collection of states. Italy wasn't unified completely until 1870. So he would have said he was from Avellino, which you can see over there in the right with the red star, which was in the Campania region. And he would have said he was Avellinese. He wouldn't have said he was Italian. The Italians became Italian when they came over to the United States, really.
Well, isn't that interesting? Who knew?
Yeah. definitely.
Wow. Well, still, this document right here is just,
I know.
you were probably doing a dance around the house when you found that one.
Yes, and it was so interesting because it was the second wife of his grandnephew who had kept all this stuff and gave it to me at a family reunion about 10 years ago because she knew it was important and she just wanted to give it to the family history person in the family. And there I was, and I was just thrilled.
Well, the photograph on
Yeah.
top of it all just
I know.
is a blessing for sure. All right, I'm going to move on to the next slide here. Tell us about I think I've got that centered up pretty well.
Yes. The naming patterns. In Italy, there was a very strong naming pattern. As they came to the United States, it was followed less and less. But this is why your grandfather has 5 cousins named Vincenzo, because Vincenzo and Maria get married and they have 3 sons, Antonio, Pietro, and Luigi. So Antonio has 2 daughters first, and he names the first daughter Maria after his mother. The first daughter is always named after the father's mother. Then he has a son who he names after his father. Pietro gets married, he has a son, he names them after his father. Luigi gets married, he has a girl, names her Maria, and then he has a son, names him Vincenzo. So now you have 3 Vincenzos born in the space of 6 years with the same surname in the same town. This is why you have to be really careful you have the right Vincenzo.
Wow.
And he could have more sons who could have more sons. This is just 3. So it's important to know and understand this. It's not always followed, but it is followed more often than not.
Wow.
Yeah.
All right. Very, very good to know. All right. So anything else on this slide?
The only other thing is that in the Italian naming pattern, you never named a child after a parent unless the parent had died. So a child could be named after the parent posthumously if the mother died in childbirth or the father had died before the birth. And that's the only
probably
time.
had the same 10 or 12 names running around all the time.
Yes, but they're not as bad as the Irish names, where I think they took 4 names and just recycled them forever.
Right. Wow. All right. Let's see was there anything new that you didn't discuss on this?
This is just the pattern that the first son after the father's father, the second son the mother's father, the first daughter the father's mother, and the second daughter the mother's mother.
Excellent. All right. So the last slide that you have here, I can't quite get it.
Yes.
Go ahead.
This is a picture of the pasta eaters in Naples in the early 1900s. And think of these as like the food trucks we have today, where they would have vendors set up. And you were well off. You had a plate of pasta with sauce and maybe a little meat in the sauce. You know, you had to be pretty well off for that.
Okay.
If you weren't quite so well off, you had a plate of pasta maybe with a little oil in it. And if you were poor, and this was all you could afford, you had the pasta water. The water the pasta had been boiled in that had some starch in it. And that's what you had. And to me, that illustrates the poverty better than all the stats in the world.
Wow. Very good story. Anything else we need to talk about?
I would just recommend, if somebody really wants to explore their Italian genealogy, a book that came out last year by Melanie Holtz, The Family Tree Italian Genealogy Guide, which is very useful. There really hasn't been a good guide for U.S. research into Italian ancestry, and it's Melanie does exclusively Italian research. She travels there, and it's a wonderful resource.
Well, that is a great tip. I will put a link for that in the show notes too. Are you speaking anywhere soon?
Yes, actually, I'm speaking at the end of January at the Merrimack Valley chapter of the Massachusetts Society of Genealogists in Georgetown, Mass. On Andiamo, Finding Your Italian Family.
Awesome. Well, I know that you are experienced in other areas as well, so hopefully we'll get you back on to talk about some of your other areas. You want to tell us about those real quick?
Yes, I do French Canadian. I speak, read, write French. I also do some Portuguese American, and because I'm in Boston, I do Irish because they're here. Next parish over.
Well, if anybody wants to find you, how do they go about finding you?
My profile is on the APG, the Association of Professional Genealogists website, and I'm on LinkedIn and Facebook, and I assume I can give you the link for my email.
Absolutely. I can put all of those links on the show notes if you wish. I can certainly do that. And I appreciate you taking the time right after the holidays here to talk to everybody about doing their Italian research. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Well, that was great fun. I know I learned a few new tips along the way. As always, look in the show notes for the links about the things that we discussed in that video. Be sure to sign up for the Genealogy TV newsletter. Links for that are also in the show notes. If you found that helpful, please like this video and share it. You know, sharing is caring, and it always helps everybody with their genealogy research. Lastly, don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so that you'll get notified of all those videos. Until next time, keep on climbing your family tree.